Hello, Dada.
Hello.
Why this beautiful behavior?
Because in the morning I am half sleepy.
Acha, I have a toilet question for you.
Hmm.
Before you flush, do you take one quick look to see if everything is okay or not?
Yeah, I think everybody does.
But why do you do it?
Because it gives me satisfaction that I'm healthy. And there are no floaty bits.
And that is important because
If there are floaty bits, it means there is a lot of gas production and I should cut down on some food.
you know this is going into my episode, right?
No problem.
I don't know about you, but everyone I've spoken to takes a quick peek at their excretion before they flush. There's this inherent checklist our minds go through.
Color, amount, shape, smell, size.
These are clues about our health, a reminder of all that we ate last night. We probably intuitively understand that our poop and pee tell some story of what's been inside our bodies. Although, once we pull that flush in the toilet, we sincerely hope, that no trace remains. We want it all gone. But our urine and poop don't just disappear. They travel down pipes, mix with the excretions of hundreds and thousands of people around us, then flow as a combined river of waste. A river that we call sewage. It's the same sewage you sometimes see overflowing in that gutter next to the chai shop or leaking out from a pipe behind your house. And while it may look disgusting to you, there are scientists out there who think sewage is a gold mine. Just like for doctors, your stool and urine sample tells them a lot about you individually, scientists say that sewage holds a shitload of information that could help us all as a community. So, what if in the future we had scientists and governments keeping an eye on the collective sewage of our cities? If you're wondering how this might play out, here's a news telecast from the year 2034.
And now we're taking a break from our coverage of the 2034 general elections to bring you our most popular city segment. Time for Puneet to give us this week's sewage survey update from Bangalore. Over to you, Puneet.
Thank you, Abhijit. As our listeners know, every week our scientists are visiting Bengaluru's gutters, sewage treatment plants and building sewage outlets, all to keep an eye on the city's health. And this week we have a few surprises. As you can see on the screen, sewage from North Bangalore shows a new entrant, the monkeypox virus. Don't worry yet. So far, hospitals in Karnataka have not reported any cases. So, authorities are now testing sewage from individual apartments to see where the source might be. The last time we had an outbreak, if you remember, was 11 years ago, back in 2023.
Oh, yes, Puneet, I remember that well. I had to cancel my wedding because of that. But I've always wondered, how do they know the monkeypox virus is coming from humans and not monkeys? So many monkeys come to my apartment almost every day.
Do they use your bathroom also, Abhijit? I think monkeys are way smarter. They do all their business outside the system. My sources say it's great that we found the virus in sewage before hospitals have seen any cases. It means we can nip a potential outbreak in the bud.
Well, that's great. Any other surprises?
Talking about nipping in the bud, sewage of New Indiranagar has been showing a dip in levels of cannabis over the weekends. Otherwise, levels usually go up Friday onwards.
Wow, this is fantastic news.
Why? The medical benefits of cannabis?
That's great. This debate can wait. Thanks, Puneet. We also thank BBMP and BWSSB for sharing their sewage surveillance data with the citizens of Bangalore publicly. Now we go back to the general elections of 2034.
Welcome to Imagined Tomorrow. This is the show where we imagine hypothetical futures for India. Futures that could become a reality when science and tech try to solve problems within our uniquely Indian contexts. What would these scenarios look like? And should we even make them happen? That's what we'll talk about. I'm your host, Shreya. That news telecast you heard was about an imaginary system in a future Bangalore where the government and scientists together are monitoring the city's collective poop and pee. Can this actually become a reality? That's what we'll explore in this episode. A future where there's city-wide poop surveillance. And we'll answer these questions. What can sewage tell us about a city and its people? Can sewage or poop surveillance really help us? And are there things that we should be wary about? Welcome back. We'll start with the first two questions. What can sewage tell us about a city and its people? And can surveillance of sewage really help us? To find out, I didn't have to go too far out in the future or too far from my home because Bangalore, where I live, already has scientists looking through our shit.
My lab director, Purva, and we have a sewage. It's actually a river. It's kind of like a sewage gutter now, very close to where we both live.
That's Dr. Varsha Sridhar, a molecular biologist and the CEO of a company called Molecular Solutions Care Health in Bangalore. When COVID-19 hit India in 2020, she wanted to do something to help. The idea for that something was sparked by an article.
I think there was a newspaper article sometime in March 2020, which spoke about this Netherlands university called KWR. They were able to detect SARS-CoV-2 in the sewage about 3 or 4 days before people actually started talking about their symptoms.
This Netherlands study became quite viral because it showed two things. One, that people were shedding the COVID virus in their stool, and two, that you could see that virus in the collective sewage of a city several days before people actually started feeling ill with symptoms. Before people even started getting tested.
So it has this potential as an early warning system for COVID waves. Angela Chowdhury, who is the CEO of Swasti Health Catalyst, she and I had been in touch on various other COVID initiatives at the time. And she actually forwarded it to me and said, hey, check this out. This is quite interesting. Can we talk about sewage-based surveillance for COVID in India?
Dr. Varsha wasn't immediately convinced. But she read through papers, had some more discussions with her colleagues, and then decided, why not?
And this was during the first lockdown. So all of us had like time on our hands, basically.
Now, Dr. Varsha herself had never peeked into sewage before. But when you have a gutter in your neighborhood, why not start from there?
And so one day we just kind of went there with our little bucket. And I think we had gloves, but we forgot to wear them. We had a little bottle. We had a bottle and we had a string. And we said, let's go and collect this water.
But the process of collecting this water was not sophisticated at all.
You kind of crawl along the side of the gutter and you throw this thing in and the bottle doesn't sink. It like floats around, bobs around. There's no water being collected. Then we have to take it out and everything is like dripping and it's stinky. And there are a lot of people, like there's actually a house that was like, we were on the side of a house and the guy was like brushing his teeth and also like spitting out. So we were literally like under his arc of his spit. We were like, please, we are here. Don't spit on our heads.
Despite these little fiascos, they did manage to fill one bottle with gutter sewage. And back in the lab, their colleagues analyzed it.
And so we ran it and it came back as positive. And that was the first time both Purva and I were like, oh crap, this is actually real. This is actually happening. It's not just in the newspaper or whatever. It's right there in our backyards.
This was in June 2020. Bangalore, which has more than 11 million people, had officially reported just about 200 positive cases. Yet, an open drain, a gutter, right in Dr. Varsha's neighborhood had fragments of this virus.
And then we freaked out and we were like, crap, we didn't like wear PPE. We didn't even properly wear gloves. The only thing I think we had done was wash our hands with sanitizer like crazy after we touched that water. But that was about it.
Over time, Dr. Varsha and her colleagues got better at protecting themselves. And they got more money to expand their operation to 46 open drains across Bangalore. And almost every gutter they looked into, they could find the COVID-19 virus, which showed them that gutter sewage is a pretty good place to search for viruses that make us sick. Not just that, they could see a trend where virus levels in sewage would rise before the officially reported numbers would, based on RT-PCR tests. So, our gutter sewage was giving us a little bit of early warning. If you're wondering, why is this such a big deal? Well, in a country like India, many people don't have access to good affordable hospitals or testing labs. So we often take too long to identify the outbreak of a disease. Any system that can give us an earlier warning then can be a game changer because it buys us more time to act. In fact, COVID showed us how important it is to have an early warning system because otherwise you have to rely on people's behavior, people getting tested and people reporting those tests officially. The thing is, people can choose not to test. What they cannot choose to do, however, is not to excrete. They will poop and pee, and when they flush, their excretions will carry the viruses they had inside them. So, sewage can serve as a proxy for infections in a city. The question then is, where does sewage flow in Indian cities? You would imagine through sophisticated sewer lines, those interconnected pipes that lead from your toilet to a sewage treatment plant. But the reality is that many Indian cities don't have these sewage networks. And in the cities that do, like Bangalore, Mumbai or Delhi, many areas are not connected to the network. So a lot of sewage ends up in gutters, open drains. And what Dr. Varsha's work was showing is that monitoring this gutter sewage can be a good way to keep an eye on the city's residents. But as she quickly found out, open drains have a tiny problem. They could tell her if infections in the city were going up or down, but not where in the city they were going up or down. Think of it like weather forecast.
Generally, the weatherman will say today Bangalore will be hot and sunny. But there may be like an isolated shower in, say, Vijayanagar, which the meteorological department may not be able to tell you with great precision. So I kind of think of the open system as that.
This is because gutters or open drains are, open. It's hard to say with confidence where the stuff inside these drains actually comes from.
But you start seeing trends and you're like, okay, it seems like more and more sites are becoming positive. So as a city, Bangalore city is kind of increasing, or there is a new wave coming. It's more like a zoomed out kind of a thing, not a very zoom in, exact micro locality kind of a thing.
A zoomed out view is quite valuable because it can quickly tell city authorities when to ramp up testing, when to send out alerts for masking or vaccination, and when to get hospitals ready for another wave of sick patients at a broad city level. But if you do want to find out where infections are going up or down in a city, then you have to get inside the chaotic network of sewer lines. More on this after a quick break.
So this is one of our meeting rooms. That way through is the director's office, and this is the second floor lab.
That's Dr. Farah Ishtiaq, an evolutionary ecologist at the Tata Institute for Genetics and Society. I went to meet her in early 2022, and once we entered her office, she opened her laptop and pulled up a map.
So each red dot, what we are looking at, represents a sewage treatment plant in Bangalore.
Unlike Dr. Varsha, who analyzes the wild, wild west of gutter sewage, Dr. Farah's team tracks sewage flowing through the more organized sewer network. Not all of Bangalore is connected to it, but many parts are. And if you are, then this is how it works. Once you pull that flush in your toilet, your excretions go swirling down the toilet bowl into a pipe. From there, it enters a bigger network of pipes, where it meets and mixes with the flushed waste of all your neighbors and then their neighbors, until it all reaches the nearest sewage treatment plant or STP. Once it comes here, it sits for a while before being treated and cleaned up. It's this sitting raw sewage that Dr. Farah's team collects from every sewage treatment plant. Bangalore has 33 of these STPs, and the cool thing is that every STP receives sewage from a cluster of neighborhoods, or what's called its catchment area. So you can match sewage from each STP to a different set of locations.
Say, if you want to understand the hotspots in the city, for that sewage treatment plant works really well because, as I said, each sewage treatment plant has its own catchment area. So you can narrow down that information to that level, right? How many wards, what's the population, where it might be happening.
In short, because STPs cater to specific areas, you can pinpoint where infections start and how they spread.
Given the intricacy of the whole sewage network what we have, I think it's the best way of telling how the virus is moving in the city.
Dr. Farah got to witness this herself in December 2021.
So for example, this is Halsuru.
She pulls up data for an STP that's located in central Bangalore. Up to mid-December 2021, the viral load of that sewage remains low. But suddenly, the viral levels begin to shoot up. First at this STP, then in another one, then another one. And by the third week of December 2021, Dr. Farah could see in the sewage that there was a new wave of COVID sweeping through the city. RT-PCR tests caught this rise in infections only in Jan 2022. So, what we later called the third wave was first detected in the city's sewage. I asked Dr. Farah how it feels to be among the first people to know that cases are going up while others around you are oblivious.
Feels scary. It's nerve-wracking, right? When you see something is building up and we don't know what can you do with these lines going up and down, right?
Countries like the US made good use of their STP surveillance data during the first few waves of COVID. For example, in some cities, health officials used it to decide where in the city they should send resources first. Some hospitals there also monitored their local sewage treatment plants to figure out when they should expect the next flood of COVID-positive people from the surrounding areas. Back in Bangalore, officials also seem to be keeping an eye on sewage surveillance data for two things. One, to know when a new COVID wave could be coming. And two, to know what variants are circulating in different parts of the city. That's because Dr. Farah and her colleagues are also analyzing the genetic makeup of the viruses in sewage. By now, you probably know that some variants of the COVID virus have been worse than others, and sewage makes it possible to track them before people actually start coming to hospitals.
The power it has to change our healthcare system, I think it's amazing. I never thought I'll enjoy it so much, but I do.
Bangalore's sewage surveillance system is one of its kind, where researchers worked with government agencies and they monitored the different kinds of sewage systems you can find in an Indian city. Today, COVID signals from both the city's open drains and the sewage treatment plants go up on a public dashboard every week, so anyone can see what's happening in their area. There's a link to this dashboard in the show notes. This seems like the beginning of something very interesting. But what can a system like this become in the future? More on that after a quick break. Welcome back. COVID was a testing ground for quite a few sewage surveillance systems in our city. Bangalore was one, but there were also smaller similar projects in cities like Hyderabad, Pune, and Mumbai. But what about the future? What else can we track? Well, there are some big plans. The Bangalore teams, for example, have already expanded testing to other respiratory viruses like influenza and H1N1. There were also attempts to monitor the monkeypox virus. Remember that scare in mid-2022?
I had to cancel my wedding because of that.
Then there are plans to see if other microbes like the dengue virus and the cholera bacteria can also be tracked regularly in a city's sewage. In short, if there's a bad bug that we shed in our stool or urine, researchers want to monitor it. That way, we can have an early warning system that gives hospitals, doctors, and health officials a heads up that, okay, something dangerous could be coming up. In fact, monitoring sewage to keep track of public health isn't a new idea at all. We've done it for polio for a very long time. India was declared polio-free in 2014.
India has now become a polio-free nation.
But scientists continue to track the virus in our sewage. From time to time, they did find the virus lurking around. And when they did, governments investigated and took action like cranking up vaccination in certain areas. In the future, a poop surveillance system could be a great way for city authorities to track the health of the residents, so no outbreak can surprise them. But there are other things that can be tracked in sewage too, like drugs. From coffee to cigarettes, hormone pills to antidepressants, heroin to cocaine and cannabis, our bodies metabolize only part of everything we consume or smoke. And what our bodies don't need gets excreted, which means that drugs, both the ones you can buy from pharmacies and the ones that might be illegal wherever you live, it all ends up in sewage. So, in theory, sewage can tell you how any community uses a drug. Like this one study that researchers in Greece did. They looked at sewage in Athens and found that after the country's debt crisis started in 2009, people started using more high blood pressure medications, antidepressants, antipsychotics, and illegal drugs like meth. But studying sewage for drugs is no longer just an academic exercise. Australia has had a national wastewater drug monitoring program since 2016. Several cities in China are also monitoring illegal drug use in their sewage. And scientists in New Zealand are working with the police to give them sewage-based intelligence. Now, what they're trying to do in general is to see the different kinds of drugs that are being used in their countries. It also gives them a way to see if any new synthetic drugs have sneaked in, and to understand whether drug busts or addiction treatment programs have worked or not. The idea is that unlike people, excretions don't lie. And since these excretions in sewage can't be tied back to individuals, this monitoring isn't targeting anyone in particular, unlike other drug surveillance. Still, there are ethical issues with this, which we'll discuss in a moment. Coming back to India, I haven't been able to find out if people have used sewage to track drug usage here, but clearly it is possible to do, which makes sewage quite a powerful medium to understand a city and its people.
Wastewater, because of the reason that it emerges from the human body system, carries the legacy of whatever drugs we have consumed, whatever diseases we have, whatever bacteria, virus, pathogens are there in us. All of this ends up in this, the elementary canal of the city, so to say.
That's S. Vishwanath. He's an urban planner and the director of the Biome Environmental Trust in Bangalore. He's also an expert in all things water, which includes sewage or wastewater.
It's a good barometer or a thermometer or the indicator of the city's consumption and the city's disease patterns. Consumption of medicines, of hormones, everything, all that emerges there. And therefore, when you check in the wastewater treatment plant, you broadly get an idea of what the city is going through.
But sewage is not just a thermometer for what the city consumes. It is valuable in itself. After all, it is water. In fact, 80% of all the fresh water we consume in our cities gets converted to sewage or wastewater. And anything with water is precious.
For me, the major worry at all points of time is what's happening post-treatment. Nobody's bothered about the post-treatment globally in all the research, right?
But Vishwanath cares. Because if a city's wastewater is good post-treatment, it is not only safer for our sewage treatment plant workers and anyone who works around sewage, but it also has tremendous potential.
So wastewater in itself has a lot of nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, because it's coming from plant sources which are consumed by people and animal sources which are again consumed by people. So they're very nutrient rich. They're also organic carbon rich and they're also water rich.
And this makes wastewater a gold mine for farmers.
If treated properly and if the health risk is managed, then they can apply it on agricultural land and it will require less fertilizers and it will increase productivity and if managed safely can provide food security and livelihood security to farmers around the city.
In fact, there's so much potential here that cities like Bangalore have been sending out their treated wastewater or sewage to fill up empty lakes in drought-prone surrounding areas. When the lakes fill up, groundwater recharges, which the farmers then use to grow crops. Basically, our poop-enriched water could be growing those potatoes and veggies you consume. Which is why any surveillance system that monitors raw sewage flowing out of homes should also monitor treated sewage that flows out of these sewage treatment plants or gutters. It's only then that you also begin to understand if our treatment methods even work. What kinds of viruses and bacteria are we letting out of a city and into our lakes, rivers, and farms? What kinds of heavy metals? Can we find ways of making this wastewater truly, truly clean?
So the mecca of development is the wastewater treatment plant. These are pilgrimage sites for us to visit and learn so much from. It really gets me excited.
The dream is big. Full-fledged sewage or poop surveillance systems in our cities tracking diseases, drugs, and water quality in real time. So we know of any threats that are coming our way and we safeguard our future. But are we equipped to make these dreams a reality? All right, time for our last question. If real-time poop surveillance systems did become a reality in our cities, are there things that we should be wary about? Well, first, there's the question of who will do this monitoring every day.
Each wastewater treatment plant has its own laboratory to check the quality to meet Pollution Control Board norms.
But these labs track only a few things and are pretty basic.
It could be upgraded to make sure that it tracks wastewater epidemiology-based parameters also, which includes virus, bacteria, AMR, and everything else. That would be an ideal system.
But it's not just technological or scientific upgrade that's needed. You will need many different kinds of experts to come together. Not just virologists, doctors, and public health experts, but also people like Vishwanath who understand water and sewage. Because what you interpret from sewage will depend on whether you really know how sewage flows from different parts of your city. Is the sewage network mapped? Do we know how the open drains move water? How many homes are connected to the sewage network? How many are not?
So a whole bunch of variables are there. What's interesting for me is this, that I bring the sewage knowledge and Farah, Varsha, the others bring the SARS-CoV-2 knowledge.
But even with the right kind of collaboration, a public sewage surveillance system has one big challenge. Communicating what the sewage data means, what it can show and what it can't. Because science is complex and it comes with a lot of caveats and nuance that can be easy to overlook while reaching conclusions.
Communication is probably the hardest thing. It's definitely been the hardest thing for us with our current pilot within Bangalore. How do you communicate risk? How do you communicate with various different partners, each of whom have different priorities? And how do you communicate the uncertainties in what you're looking at? So one of the problems in scaling would be trying to figure out who are your partners, what are their priorities, and how do you communicate risk to each of them? It's the same data, but each of them is coming to see it in a different, the perception is different.
Also, different government agencies will need to buy into this vision of poop surveillance and actually see it as something useful. Dr. Varsha, for example, had to get the permission of the Bangalore Municipal Corporation because this body governs the city's open drains and it was also handling the COVID pandemic in the city.
If you tell them this is a research project, we don't really know what's going to happen. Do you think you can kind of allow us to do this? It may take some time, but they're actually quite willing to support it.
But keeping that support going can be a challenge.
Only later on, when we actually we felt that we had spikes, and then we went to BBMP and they were like, no, there is no way you can have a spike because we are not seeing it. It's only when those down the line, when there is differences in the data, and as a group, we were not sure how to interpret it and they were not sure how to integrate it. That's when I think the difficulties actually began to kind of crop up a little bit more.
Even in the US, not all states want to be part of their national sewage surveillance program. Some because they don't have the time or manpower for it. Others because they are concerned about what information gets revealed. Like maybe your city gets labeled as the heroin capital or the meth capital. In fact, privacy is a big question. At the moment, we've been monitoring sewage from sewage treatment plants and open drains. These are kind of broad places where nothing can be tied back to you. But it is possible to zoom in further. If we had to go full sci-fi, imagine tiny robots crawling through pipes, taking samples of sewage from a single street, a single home, or the outlet of your individual toilet. Although I'm sure that robot will hit multiple things that shouldn't have been flushed in the first place. Alright, let's imagine a more likely scenario. A college deciding to monitor sewage flowing out of individual hostels maybe. Or a resident welfare association testing the sewage flowing out of an apartment. Dr. Farah herself tried to test the sewage from her apartment building.
I think we were just almost there, the third wave, and because we have this WhatsApp group, we'll say, oh, so-and-so's house is positive and they'll be in isolation. So then I thought maybe if I go to the outlet of the building, it might help us to understand. And I've been testing it twice a week.
Dr. Farah did it for science. Because at the time, she was trying to figure out how the number of infected people corresponds to the viral load in a sewage sample. Her apartment folks were okay with her tinkering around. But her neighboring building, well, not so much.
And they stopped me. I know, because I think what happened in the Omicron, pretty much a lot of people were doing the rapid antigen tests, right?
Which meant that not everyone was officially reporting their COVID status. Yet, their sewage could reveal the truth.
And I think with the COVID, it has been very hard on everyone. Yeah, this is why I say community participation is very important. At one point, we have to convince our local government, which is very nice. They are so cooperative. But even if you have everything, all the permissions, at the end of the day, you need your neighbor and community to come forward and understand the value of that work.
Because even though sewage surveillance offers a layer of anonymity, there is still a risk of stigma.
Let us say a set of flats is prone to tuberculosis and you're finding TB from a set of flats. Now there can be social ostracization once that information is public. How do you handle that?
Also, how are you choosing where you're collecting sewage from? Are your choices based on science, or do you have an MLA breathing down your neck? Are you maybe targeting areas dominated by people of a certain religion or caste?
Maulana at the center of Corona storm.
We did that, in the initial days of the SARS-CoV-2. The Tablighi Jamaat was picked and was targeted mercilessly, right? So in this day and age, data and information is misused rather than used, and is misused for a certain particular objective which people in power decide, right? Everything is guided by the lens of ideology and politics. And so therefore we have to be aware of it at all points of time when we do our science to say, how do we safeguard the interests of the weakest?
There are also administrative questions that don't have straightforward answers. Like, who owns a city's sewage? Who controls what you monitor and do with it? In Bangalore, for example, the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board manages the sewage treatment plants. The municipal corporation has jurisdiction over the open drains and health.
So there's always these turf issues which emerge. So again, we'll have to figure out ways by which cooperation can be obtained.
Then there's the question of who owns the data from sewage. All that disease, drug, water quality data that will be generated in huge volumes. Is it the scientists? The government? What about big pharma wanting to push their medicines in certain areas? Can a private company offer a sewage monitoring service to housing societies, where the resident welfare associations decide what they want to snoop on, like who's smoking weed or who has TB?
There are many aspects of open source data which can be weapons for those who have the processing power. With big data, processing power gives you rich information to act on. How do you make sure that that's not the only determinant for the use of data? How do you make sure that it's in the general public good?
The power of monitoring sewage or our collective poop and pee to benefit our future can be immense, especially as more people move to cities generating more wastewater than ever before. But good intentions aren't enough. If we do end up with sewage monitoring systems across our cities, we will need better legal and ethical groundwork. We will need to ask and answer tough questions. And we will need to do them not tomorrow, but now. Imagined Tomorrow is created and hosted by me, Shreya Dasgupta. Theme music, sound design, mixing and editing by Abhijit Shailanath. Thanks to all the researchers who spoke to me for this episode, Dr. Varsha Sridhar, Dr. Farah Ishtiaq, Mr. S. Vishwanath and Dr. Deep Kumar Raman. Thanks to Rahul Menon for voicing Puneet and Matthew Vettigard for voicing Abhijit in the fictional news piece. We had research help from Porni Ray and Parvati Nair and script editing help from Abhishek Madan. If you enjoyed this episode, do share it with your friends and family and give us a shout out on social media. Our email is imaginedtomorrow@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter @Shreya Dasgupta. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's it for today. See you soon.